Well, you can write on the back.
Yeah, it's not music. It's a heavy story. It's a heavy experience.
Well, you know what? I think it's important that people feel.
Yeah.
Like we're all always used to being
Talking
cool
about that.
about it. Yeah. It's okay to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it's important to be.
What is it, Nick Sacraments from Saskatoon. She's their one of their Indigenous coordinators. Does anti-racism investigations. And then she talks about if you're not uncomfortable,
Oh yeah.
you're not moving.
Yeah. That whole course is very uncomfortable. I'm
Yeah,
just
shocking,
a
I know.
I'm just
They
a
were really
self-service.
struggling. Rick said, I can't find anybody, and she said it give me $100 too, so I thought about your fees out. Yeah. And I think it's her own money too, because the college is really broke. So.
You're everywhere these days. You're busy yesterday too with the opening. Oh yeah,
Wow.
good. Are you
What's
jumping
there?
on the bus? Yeah. Our science students are going. There's
Okay.
like it's quite an interesting site in terms of.
I'll get you to come sit.
At the very end, I know we got you at the very end. Okay. Yeah, you bet. Thank you. Watch the wires. Yeah. Because you're gonna.
I'm like, and I'll give you a hand to put it up.
I'm okay.
You're okay?
She's got good legs.
Should put it on the end.
Yeah, well, just hang on.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's the deal.
So, you're up. She gonna sing. That's amazing. Good for her. We're very lucky. Come on up.
You didn't say I could wear my dress skirt.
I thought you'd know. The water's there for you guys.
Smile. Don't look miserable.
Okay, welcome everyone. Can't move it up anymore. It's too tight. Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Welcome. My name is Ricky Ducharme, and I'm the manager of Indigenous Student Support Services here at Lakeland College. We would like to begin our program and our Truth and Reconciliation panel in a good way. So I would like to invite Elder Leona Carter to begin with a prayer.
Hi. The first thing usually is the offering of tobacco. And tobacco, it's not used for recreational purposes, it's used for praying. And this is what the Creator will hear our prayers when we pray with tobacco. So anyway, I do pray in my own language, which is Cree, and you follow along with me in your own way. But first of all, I do want to say, I want to thank everyone for having me here today. It is an honor and a privilege to speak with all of you. And I just want to say it's a wonderful day. It's a beautiful fall day. I always wonder, I'm always in awe of Mother Earth and the blessings that she gives us on a daily basis, but also throughout the many different seasons. And as I was driving out of my crescent this morning, I live in Edmonton and I came from Edmonton this morning. Anyway, I was seeing the leaves fall. They were beautiful to see, you know, as they're falling. But it just reminds us that, you know, Mother Nature tells us how to be human beings on this earth. If we just pay attention to Mother Nature, we can't go wrong. I always think of, you know, as the leaves fall, we let things go. That's a reminder for us too, to let things go. You know, there's things that don't serve us. You know, our belief systems, if they're not serving you, let them go. Change them. Nobody says you have to be stuck with them the rest of your life, you know. Same as with our biases. Let them go. Our discrimination, let it go. Our prejudices, our racism, let them go. Not serving us at all. When we do that, we're going to have a much more peaceful and compassionate society to live in. So just remember that about in the fall, letting things go that don't serve you. So with that, I will say the opening prayer, and I'll say it in Cree. Augustawino, inanas como humanos. Asami nagutak pimatsi une mia, miosik, miogisigak. How pewit up nano manosota. Gigoy isn't stoftatu in the tamayan. Ego ke mosom no ko kom no kina. Wisdokta ka pesi tu skat ko ya ko geisen to tamoge. Ego puite ga ya chike teyak. Ega ego wan bisksia ka ki chemi chik. Ega ego jagat mahi chik. Awasak mina puite ka pues ke snaga to hati chik kasagi hi chik geisen to tamage tamoge. Ego muta ga mama pai ya how pe wi henan. Ki wei geisen stuktama ute kautna ma ke mi asiki we o te nigan ke sapati we a ke sento tamayan except we po ngai to ana no ska gisigak ai hai.
Thank you, Elder Leona. I would like to invite Jennifer McDaniel, a foundational learning student, to please come up and read the land acknowledgement that was written by our Indigenous Student Council.
Come on up. Thank you. Good afternoon. Here at the Lakeland College, we acknowledge that the land we gather on is the traditional homeland, hunting and ceremonial gathering places of the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit. The Plains Cree, Woodland Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, and Dene, and Nakota Sioux people have practiced their culture and languages on Treaty 6 and Métis Region 2 territories for generations, and were the original caretakers of this land. Many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people call this land home today and have done so for millennia. We would like to acknowledge the history we have created together on this land and to be thankful for the opportunity to walk together side by side in friendship, learning from our past, and promoting positive relationships for the past, present, and future.
Thank you so much. I would like to take a moment now and talk about the panel and our theme. Education is our new buffalo, creating opportunities for Indigenous students in post-secondary. Truth and reconciliation can be a confusing topic, and mainly because we may not know where to begin or what to do. Our panel discussion today will hopefully help to answer some questions that you may have about truth and reconciliation at the post-secondary level. What do we mean when we say education is our new buffalo? And how does this metaphor create opportunities for Indigenous students? Our elders have said that education is the new buffalo. In our traditional culture, the buffalo was used to provide almost everything that a person could possibly need: food, shelter, clothing. This is how our elders now view education: a chance to provide for a secure a secure future in education. Elders have encouraged Indigenous youth to become educated. With that said, I would like to introduce to you each of our speakers. We have first Charlene Bonner, but in her stead, she is not feeling well today, is Jackie Bender, who is our Dean of University Transfer and Foundational Learning. I will read Charlene's bio, if that's okay, really quickly, because Jackie will be reading the speech that Charlene has provided. So Charlene has worked at the Lakeland College for almost 20 years and currently in her dream job teaching first and second year English literature courses in the University Transfer program. She is thrilled to be able to spend her days talking about reading and writing with young people who continue to inspire and challenge her. She loves to read and is especially interested in Indigenous and Canadian literature. Charlene is honored to serve on the board of the Lloydminster Native Friendship Centre and sits with that circle of women. Next, we have Vera Cardinal. Vera is from Onion Lake Cree Nation, where she raises her 6 children along with her partner, Ruben. She started her education journey in 2019 when she took evening classes for academic upgrading within this Lakeland College. She is now in her 2nd year of a university transfer program and plans on finishing with a Bachelor of Education degree. Vera is a member of the Indigenous Student Council and has been active in the community in various capacities, such as MMIW awareness. Thanks for being here. Next, we have Michael Dychuk. Dr. Michael Dychuk has been involved in education since 1977. Woo, right? When he started teaching, he retired from public education in 2014, where he left the Lloydminster Public School Division as Director of Education. Michael began working at Lakeland College in 2015 as an instructor in business, and shortly after that took a role of Faculty Development Coordinator and the Chair of Teaching and Learning. Michael retired from Lakeland College in June of 2022. He is in his 6th year as a city councillor with Lloydminster and plays an active role in seniors housing, regional development, economic development, city art committee, and has represented the city on the Heart of Treaty 6 from its initial startup. He has also been involved in the startup of Lloydminster and Region Drug Strategy, as well as the regional hub based on the City of Prince Albert's model. He is proud to be a resident of the City of Lloydminster and a former employee of Lakeland College. Thank you for being here. All right, next we have Elder Leona Carter. Leona is a Cree woman who lived most of her adult life in Edmonton, Alberta. However, she is still rooted and connected to her home community of Onion Lake First Nation. Leona has 2 children, 5 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. Her early education was spent in residential schools for 10 years, and later in life, she obtained her Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology at the University of Lethbridge. Leona's wisdom comes from her varied life and work experiences, where she has held various positions in the field of addictions, child welfare, education, corrections, and as the board member for the Parole Board of Canada. She understands colonial systems and structures, having worked in federal, provincial, and municipal governments. She also understands how colonialism has negatively impacted Indigenous nations. Leona's knowledge of her Cree culture and language comes from lived experience. She has a passion for sharing her culture and is comfortable sharing over a cup of tea or in a more formal setting such as a classroom or just like this today. Thank you for being here, Leona. We are going to begin now with Charlene, aka Jackie Bender. Come on up and share your thoughts on truth and reconciliation.
Good morning. I'm very honored to be able to share these comments from Charlene Bonner, who unfortunately can't be here today. The topic of today is Education is the New Buffalo in relation to post-secondary education. At the first feast I attended here at Lakeland College, the elder who spoke used that phrase, education is the new buffalo. He spoke about the loss of the buffalo as a means of survival and encouraged Indigenous students to pursue their post-secondary education in order to thrive in this new world. However, that puts the responsibility on Indigenous students to learn to walk in 2 worlds, the Indigenous world and the colonial system. In this model, they are the ones who need to do the work. I would like to flip that statement around and suggest the following. Buffalo is the new education. And by that, I mean that post-secondary institutions need to educate themselves as well. White settler institutions like this one need to embrace and include Indigenous ways of knowing into our classes and practices in meaningful ways. The responsibility does not rest on Indigenous students alone. We, meaning colonial institutions like this one, need to learn to walk in two worlds as well. As employees of Lakeland College, there is so much we can do. We can support Ricky and her team at events like this one. We all have the opportunity and the obligation to complete the Reconciliation Education Training Program offered by the college. If the opportunity to hop on a bus and attend the Onion Lake Powwow arises next summer, an event that the college has sponsored for several years, take it. If they are looking for volunteers for the Intertribal Powwow next spring, ask your supervisor if you can volunteer. But there is so much more work to do. Page 239 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report states the following. We need to ensure that Aboriginal children and youth see themselves and their cultures, languages, and histories respectfully reflected in the classroom. I ask you, my colleagues and our students, how is that happening in your classrooms? How are Indigenous peoples reflected in our classrooms? I teach literature, so it is relatively easy to include stories and poems by Indigenous writers. However, I don't do justice to the writers if I include them in a flippant way. I need to make them meaningful, and I try very hard to do that. In subject areas other than literature, how can we include Indigenous ways of knowing? There are so many teachings about the land, sciences, animals, constellations. Look up Robin Wall Kimmerer and Wilfred Buck for starters. Many young people and Indigenous communities are on the leading edge of business. For example, Google Chief Cadmus Delorme and Cowessess First Nation. Invite an Indigenous alum to come back to the college and speak to students about their experiences. As instructors, we can all do small things like including the college's land acknowledgement in our course outlines at the start of the semester. I usually say my own land acknowledgement at the start of each course, but this year I also copied and pasted the college's statement into my course outline. One of the Indigenous students came up to me after class and thanked me for doing that. It was a small and risk-free action, but it made a difference to at least one student. And keep in mind that those small acts added up in our classrooms could be the difference between retaining and losing an Indigenous student. Indigenous students have shared with me how uncomfortable it can be walking through these doors and sitting in these classrooms. I encourage Indigenous students to ask for what they need from the institution. I encourage you to share your experiences in teaching so that your instructors and classmates can learn from you. Students have been some of my greatest teachers. I encourage non-Indigenous students to sit beside their Indigenous classmates, say hello, and ask them about their studies. Sharing space and experiences can be an act of reconciliation, but it's a two-way street. Here are some small things that any of us can do. Wear an orange shirt today and tomorrow. Participate in events like this one and enjoy the soup and bannock after or before. Visit the language display in the library. Read a book by an Indigenous author. I have plenty of suggestions. If you don't like to read, watch an Indigenous-produced documentary. I would suggest treatytalks.com. Join the community walk at the Lloydminster Native Friendship Centre tomorrow at 1 p.m. or the MMIW walk on campus coming in October. Support authentic local Indigenous artisans. Buy their beadwork, lanyards, and wear them proudly. Starting small is better than not starting at all. I would like to close with the words of my Cree mentor, Wes Fineday. You are a white horse. I am a brown horse. We can still pull that cart together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Now we'll have Vera Cardinal come on up.
Hello, Danset. My name is Vera Cardinal. I am 37 years old and I come from the Onion Lake Cree Nation. I have 6 children and I've never spoken public before. I just want to thank the Creator for bringing us here today. We're all here for a reason. And as an Indigenous student, there's a lot of barriers that we face that is different from most students. I'm a mother of 6 kids, so that does explain a lot of barriers that I go through personally. And I started my educational journey in 2019. I was working with the Onion Lake Native Justice as a receptionist, and I felt that I could do more for my community, and I could do more for my children if I was to continue on with my education. And I decided to apply at Lakeland College because I seen they were offering the adult upgrading classes, and I was working and coming to school at the same time until one of my teachers of the adult education program offered, well, she actually asked me if I wanted to apply as a mature student. And I took on the task because I didn't feel confident in myself. I didn't feel confident enough to have this, like, I thought I wasn't at the same level of education as you know, I don't know how to say white. But I didn't feel like I was equal in my education-wise. So that was a barrier that I faced. I didn't have the confidence to come to school. But every day was a different journey for me, and I'm here today speaking to you guys. Education is the new buffalo was the quotation that she wanted us to talk about. And us as Indigenous students, we're born with the weight of our ancestors on our shoulders. We have their traumas, whether we want it or not. We still carry those traumas. It's in our bloodline, it's in our DNA. And when you do see an Indigenous student, you have to realize that they are breaking barriers to be here today. And we're trying to make a difference for ourselves and for our children, because they're always the ones who are looking up to us. We have the responsibility of carrying on our culture, our language, and our beliefs onto our children. And there's a lot of oppression that our people go through, a lot of addictions, a lot of abuse and biases that our people go through. And you know, they say that our education is funded, it's free, but at the same time, the amount that we get to survive on a month is not accurate for a human being to survive in 1 month, you know. So we have, whatever monies that we do get, we have to make sure that we're able to have enough gas, food, clothing, and shelter. So when we do bring in those aspects of having the education is our new buffalo, it's in order for us to provide shelter, to provide food and clothing, not only for ourselves, but for our children. There is a lot of mature students in this school, you know, and it's more so of us feeling like we're accepted and we belong. When I walk into a classroom, I do feel a bit intimidated. I feel as if I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to carry the workload, you know, and when I do get through it, it's such a great accomplishment that I can hang in there, that I could succeed just as much as the next person can. Also, I want to talk about how decolonization can be implemented into our schools, and that is promoting our original languages, values, and visionary thinking. You know, and promoting our language is very important to us because, like I said, we have the responsibility of carrying that language onto our children. Because if we don't carry the language onto our children, then where is our language going to go? You know, and that's why it's important for all of us to keep carrying our languages and our values and our cultural teachings and beliefs. And our visionary thinking is a bit different at the same time, but there is a common ground where we all want to get our degrees, we all want to be educated, and we all believe that we should be equal to everybody. In 2016, more than half of 52% of Indigenous women aged 25 to 64 had a post-secondary qualification, including 14% of Indigenous women with bachelor's degree or higher. By comparison, 46% of Indigenous men also obtained post-secondary qualifications, and 8% graduated with a bachelor's degree or more. I believe that these numbers could be a lot higher for us as Indigenous people, and I wanted to wear orange today in remembrance of the children that were found. You know, and it's difficult, and it could be uncomfortable to be talking about the Every Child Matters movement. You know, I was in my class yesterday, and my professor kind of sat me back and asked me, you know, did I do good? Did I do well in what I was talking about? And I had to let him know, you know, you are doing good because you're actually, you know, speaking about it. You know, you're actually talking about what is happening, and you're trying your best to explain to not only Indigenous students but non-Indigenous students of what happened to our ancestors and our grandmothers, our grandfathers, and our mothers and our fathers. And, you know, I thanked him for saying what he had to do, and that it could be uncomfortable, and it is uncomfortable. I give thanks to my grandfathers. You know, my grandmothers, they were residential school survivors, and what their experiences helped shape and form me who I am today. My parents were day school students, and they still experience the loss of language. They still experience the loss of cultural genocide and wanting to, you know, not be who they are today. You know, you have to take a look at yourself and you know, want to be better. I want to teach my children how to live in mainstream society, but at the same time, I want them to learn our culture and our language. And being a part of this school, so far I felt very comfortable. I felt like I was accepted, and I've been accepted, and all of the barriers, you know, of breaking this social bias that every First Nations person lives on welfare, and that is not true. I have two sisters who are educated. My one sister lives in Nevada. She's currently in the University of Reno, going on her 4th year to get her psychology degree. My older sister actually graduated from University of Colorado, I think, or she got her associate's diploma in psychology as well. And my mom has her education. My father is not educated. But the education my father does have is beyond me because of the cultural aspects of what he carries on and teaches us children. So I have to walk in two worlds. I have to walk in a world where I'm going to be mindful of my teachings, but at the same time I have to walk in a world where I'm going to be accepted into mainstream society, where I'm not going to have to watch my back in public because I'm an Indigenous woman. You know, being an Indigenous woman is having to be a double minority. You know, I came from an upbringing where there was love, encouragement, and a lot of caring. And I only thank my parents for that, for the way of life that they have given me, so I could be able to give the same love to my children. I want to thank you guys for having me today, and education is our new buffalo, because we are here to prosper and excel and succeed in whatever it is that we're here to do, and to be accepted and to make feel that we belong, to take up the space that we are valid for. We are here to take up space, and that space is to be mindful, to be respectful, to be loving, and to keep learning from one another. I thank you guys for having me today.
Thank you so much, Farah. You did great. Now we're going to have Michael Dijak come on up. That's a hard one to follow.
I don't know. I have to tell some stories, I guess. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me, and thanks for coming and being part of this experience. I want to thank Ricky, where'd you go? Over here, and Krista for putting this all together. I just want to make a comment with what Vera said, because it's so important that it shouldn't be lost, and that and about the double kind of whammy that women face, particularly if they're Indigenous. In 2018, Ipsos did a survey for the G20 countries, so the 20 most economically developed countries in the world, and they asked what challenges women faced. And my daughter was doing research for her paper, and the fifth one, ranked by both men and women, was pay equity. The top four related to safety, sexual assault, violence, and harassment in the workplace. So women, regardless of whatever nationality or cultural background you have, are facing this challenge in the most economically developed countries. Add to that the bias that many may have because you are First Nation. And so thank you for raising that, and I just want to make sure that that's etched in everybody's mind in terms of those challenges. Today I want to make you feel a little uncomfortable. I'm going to share some stories about my own personal experiences. I want to talk a bit about that process of going from hearing to listening, to hearing, to learning, to knowing, and how that knowing is a call to action. And knowing is really education. Whether it's finding out something in a community that's going on, and whether it's coming here in a post-secondary institution, it is a call to action. If you become a social worker, it is a call to action to do those things that you're supposed to do as a social worker. So I'm going to walk through that and kind of play with it a little bit, but I want to start with a story about where I grew up. I grew up in Lakeland, and we lived there, my wife and family, till 1998. When I was in high school, I had this dream of being a rock star. So I grew my hair long, much to my father's chagrin, took money out of my bank account, which was supposed to be a university, and bought drums and all that good stuff, right? And he was probably still doesn't forgive me. He's probably looking down now. But so we ended up rehearsing at a friend's house, and they had the big basement, so we'd go there. So I became a drummer because no one else wanted to play it. But we would go to his house, and the story really is about the family in his house. When we visited, it was just this kind of an odd kind of sensation you get. And I don't know about you, but every once in a while you get into a scenario or a situation where something isn't quite right, but you really can't quite put your finger on it. Anyways, the home was a home where Child and Family Services, often when female Indigenous young women, ages 12 to 16, were apprehended, were put in this home and looked after for periods of time. One of the women that was now a woman, the young ladies back then, and obviously was in high school, I'll give her name, Linda, ended up sort of going out with her once or twice. She dumped me anyways, but got to know her we became good friends anyways. So fast forward 15 years later, and I was a principal at school at a time, and a young boy named Jamie, who was First Nations, who I got to know real well because he visited me a lot in the office, but just a wonderful, sweet kid. He was in high school, went out drinking, they went swimming, the water was cold and he drowned. Family called me and asked me to speak at the funeral. So I went to the funeral. As it turns out, the lady that Linda, that I'd known in high school, was the aunt of this young gentleman. And I saw her there and waved, and it's tough at a funeral and service and whatnot, and said hi really quickly, and that was sort of that. But the next day I get a call in my house, and it's from Linda. So, hello, how are you, and what's going on? And so she tells me that she's been married once, got divorced. She's married now a second time, and is married to an architect, very affluent, but was on the verge of getting divorced again. And finally, her husband convinced her that she needed to act on the behaviors that she was trying to reconcile in her life. And the behaviors were that while she stayed in that home where Child and Family Services were putting her, she was one of many young women that were sexually abused by the family. I had absolutely no clue any of this was going on. So as I'm listening on the phone, I'm going, what? And you start getting all these thoughts coming back about, so what was I experiencing while I was there? And so she begins telling me this, and then she says, so why didn't you do anything about it? I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, I didn't, you're talking about sexual abuse, sexual assault. I was like, at that age, those were words that I didn't even put together in my head and think about. I was so naive, and I don't know about you guys, but I mean, that's not something I would even be thinking about. I was going to be a rock star. I was playing in a band, working on my marks, and you don't even think about those things. But we chatted a bit more and ended, and I wished her well, and that was the end of the conversation. But that experience has sat with me now for, I don't know, 20 years plus now since this happened. But what was interesting was about several weeks later, the individuals that were involved, the adults hosting the family, were apprehended, and there was court and all the rest of the stuff went on. And I ended up talking to a friend who was the mayor at the time, and I said, Dwayne, did you know about this stuff going on? He said, Michael, everybody knew. I said, what do you mean everybody knew? He said, the mothers of these young girls would threaten their children if they're misbehaving, that if they continued to misbehave, Child and Family Services would take them to this home. I said, no way, that can't be. He said, everybody knew. I said, well, didn't they tell? He said, yeah, but what did it do? Nothing until one of the victims came forth. So, the connection for me is once you learn and once you hear, once you know, you're now educated. And part of that education is the buffalo, because once you know, every single one of us is called to act. And so that's part of my motivation, I guess, and part of becoming involved in all the things I become involved with. And I want to say, when I was introduced to Ricky said, yeah, you've been involved since 1977. Leona leaned over and said, oh my God, she makes you sound ancient. So, thanks, Leona. Many days I do. However, it's that piece, I think, those experiences in your life, once you come to know, I always think of Dante's quote, and those of you who read Dan Brown are probably more familiar with it, but it's, his quote he uses, I don't remember the title of the book, but it says, there's a special place reserved in hell
for those who refuse to act when there's a high moral need. And that's been kind of a piece for me all the time, and I've had many instances, and there's a lot of stories where I've been involved in Indigenous families where young grade 6 girls were being molested at home, and girls that were coming in grade junior high that were being raped on the weekend, and trying to find ways to deal with it and whatever. And all of those pieces will leave little scars and marks on you in terms of who you are and your identity. And so it's part of that piece as you grow and educate and grow into becoming the buffalo, apparently, that make you sort of do what you do. And I think that's part of that whole process of growing and knowing. So, City Council, 2015, my daughter said, yeah, I'm going to do this if you do that. And I said, well, you need to do it, then you need to run for council. So I run for council, and been involved in some of the things that were in the bio piece, but I've been involved in the startup of the Heart of Treaty 6, the Hot 6, and I think Jackie was the creator of the Hot 6, the name, whatever it is, but there are a lot of really good things going on in there, and one of the challenges for us in terms of the city is that my concern, and I've shared it at the table, is that I felt at times like when we sat at the table, we were trying to tell Indigenous communities how to live their lives. We were colonializing this process, and that was not the intent. And so part of it is trying to, how do we deal with that within our own community? Because really, from a city council perspective, is that we really are only responsible for people who live in the city to a particular level. So what do we do in our city to make those things happen? So some of the things we have done, I think, and just want to share those. One is that we do the land acknowledgement, and that's way, way too late in the game, but we did it nonetheless. If you look around, we used to have colonial days. We no longer have colonial days. It's Lloyd X Fair. We used to have Colonial Park as a development area. It's now called Aurora. If you go to the museum, you'll see that when you walk into the museum, on the left-hand side, there's a hallway that goes all the way down. It's actually sort of the exit lane when you come out. But we have the history of some of the founding fathers. And I can tell you they're racist as hell. And part of our dilemma was, how do you acknowledge that there was this racism in the development of this community in a nice way, if there is such a way of doing it? But if you go there, you will see that part of our MO was to say, we need to be transparent, we need to be honest, and say this is what happened and this is what this individual did. And there are samples of letters, and the individual wrote in papers saying, we don't need anybody else, and pretty discriminatory, wide-ranging in terms of, if you were in English, you didn't count. It was as simple as that. But I would recommend you to go have a look at it, see it for yourself, and pause and reflect on that. The reality is it's part of our history, it's part of our community, and I know other communities have their own kind of history pieces, I think, that reflect a history that's different that many people have experienced. The city has also been engaged in bringing awareness levels to our employees. Last year we did some work. They're involved in blanket exercises, amongst other things. Pardon me. This year we brought in Holly Trache and Nista Consulting, and I saw her a couple years back in Calgary and said, this is an incredible speaker and presenter from a couple of perspectives. One is that her messaging was on point, and she made you uncomfortable enough to make you think, but also say, and here's the stuff that you can take away and read. So in the process, they learn about all the different treaties, the things that are going on, what is the Truth and Reconciliation, and just a lot of information. I want to share with you a story about her first presentation that she did, the city. So we had, I think it's 2 hours or 4 hours, I can't recall, but we had about 40 people in each session. So at the start of the very first session, she began her presentation, and a voice from the back said, you weren't the only people to put in residential schools. The whole freaking room just went, what the heck just happened here, right? And it was just back and forth, and finally, an individual in the back of the room, settled down, was quiet, and the process, and went through it. But the reality is that individual in the back of the room had their own experience with residential schools and was not First Nations. There was a level of discomfort in the room, and certainly when I talked to our town manager, Dion, he said, I don't know if it went well or not. I said, well, were people uncomfortable? Hell yeah. He said, of course. We're like, what the heck's going on, right? I said, then it was good. I said, how did it end? He said, that individual came up to the front of the room, shook hands, spent several minutes with the presenter. They both broke down, hugged each other and cried for a few minutes with each other. And I think what's so powerful about that presentation was that there was an act of reconciliation between two people. Really, there were more victims of the things that we're trying to sort of eradicate and move through, but highlighted it in a way where there was this moment where people could see that you can have these very, very difficult conversations and experiences and move forward from them. So there's always hope and optimism beyond all those things that do happen. But it does take courage, and it is going to be uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable for those two individuals. But in the end, they came to a place that was far better than where they were at the start of it. Going forward, one of the things that we're also looking at doing, as well as sort of in trying to think about the city in that context, is that how do we wrestle with this? Because obviously, based on this the presentation I was talking to you about, there are a number of people who have experienced challenges. And one of the pieces that I think Vera also mentioned is this notion of racism and biases. We all have them. We've come by them naturally. And you know what? You know, it's that story about the apple not rolling far from the tree. You get the good, you get the bad, you get the ugly. There's no way around it. And it is challenging to go in and look at yourself and see all those things that you do, because that is really a level of discomfort. But there are biases every single one of us have. And it's part of that. How do you get to it? How do you open it up and unpack it? Saskatoon has a young lady by the name of Becky Sasakamus. She's a psychologist and does training for anti-racism. So I got to sit in on part of one because my wife is a psychologist and she was doing training, and it was this PowerPoint and session online. So I could sneak in for free. But one of the messages that she had, and there's a whole set of metrics that she used, anyways, the point of it was kind of at the end of the day was that she said, if you are comfortable at the end of the day with this whole presentation, then it has meant absolutely nothing to you. You really need to start feeling uncomfortable, and when you begin to unpack why you do things, how you do things, and the impact you may be having on other people. Because it is there, it happens. Even at a simpler level, I mean, the fellow from Tabor, Dale, I think it's Dale Lang, who was the pastor whose son was, I think he was the first victim of the school shooting in Alberta, Tabor, presented to 400 plus school trustees. And he said, life's pretty tough for you guys. You have really tough things to do. They're like, yeah, of course, we're school trustees and whatever, and we do hard work. And they do. And he said, there's probably a few people in your life that if they weren't there, man, life would be good. They go, yeah, Mary's nodding. He said, so I want to give you a treat. He said, I want you to close your eyes. And for 1 minute, you get to pick those 3 people or 4 people, remove them from your life for that moment, and just imagine how great it would be. And so I looked around. Everybody just smiled, and they're just happy because they could just go through this process and nobody's in their way anymore, whatever the reason was. So he brought everybody back in and he said, well, I have some good news and bad news. And he says, that was pretty good, wasn't it? They go, oh yeah, that was just great. Well, here's the bad news. Every single one of you in this room is on somebody else's list. And everybody went, oh, geez, I didn't see that one coming, right? But the reality is around that story is that back to the biases and how we present ourselves, how we interact, how we move through, particularly around First Nations. We need to listen, we need to hear, we need to learn, and when we learn, we know. And then once we know, we need to act. And that is probably the most important part, because if you don't act and you've missed the point, and all you're doing is continuing to propagate and continue stuff that has gone on for a long, long time. One of the quotes I heard was that, and I think it was related to this on CBC radio, but we can look back with regret on things that we've done. But knowing what we know today, we need to act so that our children don't have to look back with regret on what we do today. So my call to you is we need to choose to be educated, and once we're educated, we can act, and we can act in a way where all of us can be in a better place. And that's the buffalo for everyone in terms of what you do and what you have. So anyways, thank you for being patient and listening to me.
Thank you so much, Michael. Next, we'll have Elder Leona Carter come on up.
I don't usually write a speech, but I tend to go off in tangents and tell stories, so I wrote a few little notes to try and keep me on track. But as Ricky said, I am originally from Onion Lake First Nation, and for many of you, probably you do know now, but in Onion Lake there were a couple of residential schools, and one of them was St. Anthony's RC School. That's where I went for 9 years. And then when I finished there, they only taught up to grade 8 because the educational system at the time didn't think we were smart enough to go beyond grade 8. So anyway, they sent me off to another residential school in Biggar, Saskatchewan, and I stayed there for 1 year until I turned 16. I'm an adult now, and I'm never going back. So I told my dad, if I have to go to where there's priests and nuns, I quit. So he registered me here in Edmonton at the, not Edmonton, Lloydminster, at the Composite High School. So that's where I took my high school, well, some of it. In grade 11, I quit. I said, I've had enough of this, no more. I was the only Indigenous student in that whole school. So you can imagine how I felt, you know, leaving residential schools where you sat in one classroom, one teacher, year after year after year, and then come to a school where you're moving classrooms every hour. And I'm forgetting all my books all over the place in these classrooms, you know. So I spend more time in that first few months chasing books than I did learning about what's in those books. But anyway, that was my experience. But you know, what I do want to talk about is, you know, I need to always try and preface when I talk about things that are difficult to deal with, that we need to talk about settler guilt. We don't talk about these things to make anybody feel guilty. We're here to try to educate, to have people understand where we come from, why we do the things that we do, to you know, create some level of understanding. And it's not to make anybody feel guilty at all in any way, you know. I know I've had a lot of people say to me, well, I didn't do that. I wasn't a part of that, you know. True enough, but you know, there are your ancestors, my ancestors, they were all in this, you know, together. So we need to come to terms. It is impacting society today. So if we want to make a better society, we all got to work together at it. We do have Canadian history has been told from the eyes of a lens of the settlers. It's not through the lens of Indigenous people at all. So our history is, it's a cruel history. Canadian history is very cruel to a particular, you know, to the Indigenous people. One segment of society that was not considered human. You know, and so they dealt with us in that same way, that we're just expendable, you know, we're not human beings. So to really come to reconciliation, the truth needs to be told. The truth of our history. How were the Indigenous people engaged in this society? And it's not in a good way, you know. Put on little Indian reserves. They call them social laboratories. You know, and basically experimentations going on, and you know, the theme, education is our, the buffalo, no, education is our buffalo. That came out of the Alberta Teachers Association in a book about 10 some odd years ago, maybe 15 years now. But a bunch of Indigenous teachers and elders got together and wrote that book. And it was meant for all of the teachers. But that's the name of that book, you know, is the Education is Our Buffalo. And, you know, it kept us alive for centuries here, the buffalo, in this part of the world. That was our life, you know, gave us our lifeline, taught us many things how to live. And it's so you know, we talk about education now, education on. It's the education system that started back 100 and some years ago that got us into the mess that we're in today, you know. Talk about the residential schools. That's what brought us to where we're at today. But thank goodness for survivors like me who have spoken out in the last, going back since 1990, the first one, Phil Fontaine, who publicly acknowledged his sexual abuse victimization while in a residential school. That opened up the doors for many of us people to say, hey, that happened to me too, that happened to me. There were so many now acknowledging the harms that they experienced in residential schools that the government had to do something about it. And this is where the Truth and Reconciliation, you know, started collecting these stories and coming up with the 94 calls to action, you know, and it has brought us here. And like I said, it's, you know, the survivors of today, there's not many of us left. Many have died, you know, in the process, but there are still some of us left. I spent 10 years in a residential school. And, you know, like I spent many years healing from those harms. But still, you know, you stop and think about, you wonder, what is it that we experience? I wrote down a few things of my own memories throughout the years after I left residential school. I can't stand groupies. I will not go with people in a group. Let's take a group vacation. Never will I do that. Because of residential school, everything was done in a group. We went for a walk together, we ate together, we went to sleep together. Anything groupie, I will not do. And to this day, I'm still, somebody says, well, let's go do this, you know. Only if it's 2 or 3 people, maybe 6. But if it's 15, 20 people, forget it. I shy away from things like that. But that's the impacts. Some of these impacts are still with us. Organ music, church music. I just, my hair stands on end, you know? And supposedly, you know, we were taught the goodness of the Bible, but it was not lived. It was so contradictory. I mean, I didn't learn the Bible. You know, only my mom told me about it years later, the good things it said. I says, yeah, but they didn't live it, so how can you do that? It's so contradictory. You know, it's hypocritical is what it is, because the things that they did were very, very harmful to children. You know, it's for any child to grow up in that kind of environment, I tell you, and to survive is, I'll tell you something. It's really something else. And so the organ music and smells. For years I could not go to the hospitals. My grandma was in the hospital. I couldn't go, you know, and she died there because of the smell. I could not handle the smells. It was a reminder of what it smelled like in residential school. So everything, all your senses are like hypervigilant. You notice things around you, you know. French accent. I hear a French accent, the rage comes up. You know, these are things that many of our people live with on a daily basis to this day. I've done a lot of healing work. You know, I've gone to fasting, you know, the sweat lodges and all of our ceremonies. They've helped, but I've also taken what I've learned from, you know, we talk about living in 2 worlds. Well, there's good in the other worlds too, besides my world, you know. So I've taken the good from there and learned about the energy, psychology, healing methodologies, and that's how I've helped myself, you know, to move away from these things. And I always say I want to leave this earth with very little baggage. I'm not taking very much with me. So all this emotional gotta go, you know. So, and I work on that all the time. So loud voices, banging doors, those are triggers. You just kind of, you know, somebody with a loud voice, you react. Your body's, like I said, hypervigilant. Many of us still have that anxiety, you know, that we live with on a daily basis. But thank goodness I believe in herbs, alternative medicine, things like that. GABA is an amino acid that calms the nerves. I take a lot of that. So, you know, you find different ways to help yourself. So what we have lived, we're talking about, you know, the educational system now. That's what's going to give us back our freedom. That's what's going to give us back, you know, to take us out of poverty, to take us to a level where we can enjoy life, you know, but you got to make space for us. We have to feel included in these systems. I was a Senate for the University of Alberta, a Senate member there, and they were always talking about how do we engage Indigenous communities to want to come to our university. And so I says, look around. Do we see ourselves here? Not at all. Your glossy, you know, magazines you put out, your annual reports you put out, not one Indigenous person shown in there. So how can we see ourselves? Where do you go in this university where we see ourselves? Even the Native Studies program, I asked this question and it quickly changed. I said, why are all the other departments called faculties, but yet you have a School of Native Studies? Why is that not called a faculty? Well, within a few weeks they changed it to the faculty, you know, and gave a building for the Faculty of Native Studies. And now you will see a teepee there ever so often as well. I said, we have to see ourselves here. In order to see ourselves here, this is what will bring other students here. You know, so it's making that, being very aware when you make your glossy magazines and whatever, make sure you're inclusive, that you don't deny any racial group, you know, an opportunity to be shown in these pictures. Businesses, you know, they put in their workers and stuff. Well, make sure you include Indigenous people too who are your employees, you know, in those magazines. So that's part of the inclusion as well, feeling welcome, feeling that we belong, you know, like I never had to doubt my sense of belonging. I've been very fortunate. I had parents, grandparents who taught me to be proud of who I am as an Indigenous woman. My dad was a very loud, I'd say, he had a very colorful language, put it that way. And he would say things like, "Pugan magautaksin," you know, you have to have guts. But in Cree it sounds really funny. You gotta have guts, you gotta have backbone. You know, you're just as good as anybody else. Nobody's above you, nobody's below you. That's part of our value systems. The worldview of our Indigenous people, everybody's equal. Everybody's life is of equal value. Nobody's more, nobody's less. You know, so I grew up with that kind of a mind space or that worldview that we are all equal. And, you know, I guess, you know, I looked around, it's a false belief. I'm not being treated equal, you know, but deep down I'd hear my father say, yes, you are. Yes, you are. You're just as good as anybody else. You can be what you want to do. You can do, you know, be what you want to be, is what my dad used to say. And, you know, like, what did he mean by that? Do what I want to do, be what I want to be. Well, yeah, I did get to some of those places. You know, I was, what, 1 month shy of my 41st birthday when I decided to go to university. So I went to university. And all this time I thought university was for white people only and for smart people. And I found out, no, it's for anybody who's willing to work hard. The information is not hard, it's just you need to work hard, you know, and that's what university told me. It also gave me a real sense of humility, you know, going into university and studying and researching. It just told me how little I know, how little we know. When you start reading the articles, oh my goodness, I would be in that library 8 hours at a time. I was a smoker and a real coffee drinker. But in that 8 hours, I'd be so engrossed in doing research that I would forget about my smoking, forget about my my wanting coffee and stuff like that. It just, like I said, it was a very humbling experience. I came away with my 4 years from there knowing I know so little. So as much education as we get, it's also the life experiences that matter. How we treat each other on a daily basis. How are you in your family? Do you respect your family members? And how do we talk to each other? Are we kind to each other? And I guess that's basically what I look for is, the Indigenous people, we have intergenerational trauma. We're not the only ones that have that. I'm not trying to minimize our harms that we came away with. You think of the mental abuse, the being called le sauvage all the time, or another one is chia, having my ears pulled, and chia, and then say, I never knew. A year ago May, my daughter asked me, she says, Mom, do you know what that means? And I said, no. She means dog in French. I never knew that. The nuns were calling me dog all the time. Oh, okay. Years later finding that out. But with all these harms, epigenetics tells us, yes, we acquire, we inherit the genetics of our ancestors going back many, many years. I say 10,000 years. Because the genes that are in me goes back 10,000 years. The residential school was only 150 years. Did a lot of harm, did a lot of damage. But what about prior to that? Those are the genes I carry. I carry the strength of my ancestors. The strength, the wisdom, the resilience, all of that knowledge that my ancestors left me with. That's what I call upon in my prayers. When I need help, I call upon my ancestors to help me. And they're always there. They never let me down. And I always say, wherever I go, they're with you all the time. I have an entourage wherever I go. I'm never alone because my ancestors are always there with me. And that's another belief system that we have, that we're never alone. Just talk to them. I talk to my mother all the time. She's been gone for 11 years. But I can still hear her voice. My brothers and sister who've left us, I can still hear their voice, and it's wonderful to be able to still be there. They say we're only separated by a veil. The other side, that transition that we take when we leave our physical body and into the other side, the elders tell us it's only a veil that separates us. They're right there. And I believe that because sometimes I see glimpses of them. And no, I'm not psychotic. But it's all in our belief systems. What do we believe? And I believe in the good things. I really do. And that's, the ancestors left us with so much more in the 10,000 years that we've been here as Indigenous people. And we got to remember that. And we got to take that and live it in a good way every day. I think as far as the reconciliation, like I said, reconciliation likely would not have happened without the survivors telling their stories and continue to telling their stories. There is something I want to leave you with though. There's one book I brought. If you ever want to know about Indigenous history, this is one book I highly recommend. It tells it all. Once you've read this, you don't really need to read anything else. No, I'm just kidding. But this is called the Reconciliation Manifesto, Recovering the Land, Building the Economy. And it's by Arthur Manuel. Unfortunately, he's passed on, but what an incredible, incredible man he was. What a life he lived. He is something else. So was his father. He followed in his father's footsteps. His father was a residential school, well, so was he a residential school survivor. But he took his experiences and put them on the world stage and talked about how, the Indigenous people can rebuild themselves, rebuild ourselves, And so this one tells it all, the history, how it came to be, the poverty of our Indigenous people. He explains it so easily and so well in this book. like I said, I can't encourage you enough to read this book, you know, and I just have to leave you something about this land acknowledgements. You know, everybody is into that now, but do we really take it to heart? Do we really know what it means to acknowledge, you know, that we've had Indigenous people living on our lands prior to, you know, contact, prior to colonialism? You know, what kind of lives did we live? What kind of animals are there? What kind of plants did we use for our medicines and stuff? All of that, you know, that's part of the reconciliation, getting to know what territory you're on and what was there and what is still there. But the way he sees it, the way he tells it though, this reconciliation is, you know, it's like saying, I stole a bicycle from you and I'm sorry I did that. And then that's it. Not giving it back. That's what land acknowledgement is. Story, I stole your land from you, but I'm not giving it back. You know, so I got to leave you with that thought. But get this book. It's so important to understanding what the reconciliation is all about, and also the history. He tells the history like it should have been written. Okay, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Leona. So now we would like to open up the conversation. This is your chance to ask any questions. I'm going to try and unravel this mic so I can pass it to you guys, unless you feel comfortable coming back up to answer questions. So the moderators have microphones, and all you need to do is put up your hand and ask a question. Yes, let's go. There are notes on your tables if you are stumped, so there's some notes there. You also have some post-it notes on your table. Those are for you to consider your commitment to truth and reconciliation. I would like you to write down what your commitment is to truth and reconciliation, and when you're done, post that post-it note in the Indigenous Student Lounge so that we can see that. Okay, give it some thought. Any questions? There's a question over here.
Hi, my name is Stella Bear. I am from Little Pine Reserve. I am proud to be a part of this panel, this presentation, and I have a question for all of the elders. As an Indigenous person myself, I've always lived my life in fear because I was bullied in middle school for being too white to be Native or to be from a reserve. So people always looked at my white skin instead of to learn more about me or to ask questions and to be my friend. They were more there to bully me rather than to be my friend. So my question is, for my own self-identity, what else?
From whoever you are, just say, this is who I am, this is who I identify with. I identify as Indigenous woman, and be proud of that. And you know, whatever people say about you, it's about them. It's not about you. When people put you down and stuff, it's their crap. I'll tell you, that's their crap, not yours. Don't take it on. That's all I can say. Don't take it on. Be proud of who you are.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Stella, for the question, by the way. Don't be shy. There's prompts on the table. Anybody from HR have a question? Oh, we have a question. Okay, okay. Yeah.
I'm a really awkward walking person, and one of the things that's advantageous to the culture is the choice to use the audio resources, the language, the terms, and I'm actually looking for some positive alternate history that we can look forward to so that we can conceptualize what's simply better, you know, because this is depressing and it's overwhelming.
Can you just hold the mic a little bit closer to your mouth just so we can hear? Thank you.
Yeah, what I'd like to look for is an author's name or a reference for some very positive history that is alternate fiction, that is used to conceptualize a better lived or potential experience.
Okay, did we understand the question? Some literature on an alternate, can you repeat that? An alternate,
more positive experience so that we can conceptualize or project how things could be even slightly better than they are or were.
Jackie just mentioned Charlene Bonner would probably have a lot of suggestions, and maybe we will pass. Yes, yeah. Okay, so Chris is going to put the question on the page. Sorry. Okay, Krista will get that information and share it to the page. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. There was another question. Yes, right over here.
Thank you to all the speakers. We've been, our department over the last number of years, probably 4 or 5 years, have been looking at ways of taking out systemic barriers in our recruitment process. So, and when I do hear you talk about students being here and making sure that you see yourself here as our employees should also look like our students, and they should feel welcomed here. So my question kind of is maybe Vera to you, what does it take for an HR department, which is this group here, what are some tips that we could learn to make it more attractive, to access, to show the opportunities for employment at Lakeland for our students, but also our Indigenous community members? Any ideas?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we'll bring this up to them.
Okay, did you get that, Vera? Okay, here comes the mic. Okay, I think you're going to hold these a little closer to your...
Hi. I think one of the ideas that could help us Indigenous students to feel more accepted and to feel that we do belong in this school is more Indigenous representation. Like, for instance, when I talked about how when we were in class learning of residential schools and the 2015 and what September 30th really means is to actually have Indigenous representation and having speakers and having an elder or a survivor who is willing to share their stories and their experiences. And when we do see an elder, like for me, I would feel comfortable. I would feel like, oh, I can go to this person. They understand the language. They understand cultural teaching, because there's always a lesson, a teaching that they have, or a story that kind of relates to what we go through as Indigenous students. Like I said, there's different barriers. Like, I'm a mother, I have children, and like I have to make sure that they're taken care of before I actually come here first. And you know, having somebody as an elder, if somebody I could look up to being present at the school would make it a lot comfortable to having, like I said, the uncomfortable conversations of 2015, to have like Indigenous representations saying, oh, this is what happened to us, and I'm going to share my story with the students, you know, and that's helping us feel like we do belong here, we are accepted here. And you know, like more language programs, the Indigenous language programs that are very important to us, because there is a loss of language. I understand so much, but there's so much for me to learn, you know. There's, I think that's one step in going towards it. And like Leona said, like to see pictures and posters of Indigenous people, like that would help us to say, oh, look, there's other, I shouldn't say Indians, but that's what we call ourselves. Oh, there's other Indians here. Yeah. Like, oh, there's other Indians here. Okay, like maybe there's somebody I know, so I can feel comfortable. So when I did come to school, I actually seen some of my friends that I went to school with in high school, you know, and I was like, oh, okay, I know this person, I'm good, you know, like, so with that said, like, that helps a lot. Seeing more Indigenous people, seeing the artwork, the beadwork, the sewing. I made this skirt that I'm wearing. I made my boyfriend's shirt. I made my daughter's dress. You know, more of those types of you know, maybe after school programs, not after school programs, but extracurricular activities that way, where we can actually come together. If somebody wants to learn how to make skirts, you know, you don't have to be Indigenous to learn how to make a skirt, you know. It's something where people can come together in a form of reconciliation.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Oh, yes, there's a question over here. Over here. Okay.
Hello. First of all, you guys are doing a good job already, so appreciate it. My question is for Vera. Don't mean to pick on you, but I know the experience of moving from our home, Onion Lake Cree Nation, to a more westernized society and gaining an education here. What was the shock moment for you when you realized things were way different from how it is back home?
I think Deshane wants to pick on me because he's my brother. But I think the shock value was the time management. You know, back home we can hand in a due assignment and we're still going to get full marks. So having that proper time management where I'm going to make enough time to study, to read, to write, for time for my children, you know, that was my overall, you know, huge barrier, was that time management and how I had to make sure my assignments were going to be on time. Like, because, you know, back home on the reserve, we can hand in an assignment a week late and we're still going to get full marks for that, you know, like that was a big shock. So, you know, I did actually live in Lloydminster for a while, and the big shock value for me moving out of reserve and to live in Lloydminster was how closely every house is together. And you know, like constantly, you know, I could just go to McDonald's, it's right across the street. That wasn't like a shock value, it was more of yes. But yeah, like it's the time management, the making sure that I'm making more use of my time equally with my children, with my studies, and just being in a classroom setting where there's more non-people of color than there is Indigenous. You know, I have a real Indigenous accent when I'm around my peers. You know, it really comes out, but when I'm here, I find myself having to pronounce words more accurately, and you know, to make sure that I'm understood. Yeah, like there's that was my whole thing. Like we have different humor. Humor was another one. Our humor is very at times dark. But at the same time, like it helps us to keep going in life. It helps us to brush off the negativity of the things that we go through, but when we enlighten ourselves and bring humor to it, it helps us realize, like, you know, things aren't as bad as they are, as what we make it out to be. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much. We're going to take one more question. This is just about 1 o'clock. One question over here. Yeah, right here.
Sure. Hi, thank you so much for speaking. This question is actually directed at you, Leona. As a person I'm seeking ordination with the United Church of Canada, and we've done a lot of work to try to incorporate reconciliation in different ways into our community. So for instance, this weekend is our Worldwide Communion Sunday, and I'm looking for a bannock maker, so if somebody can help us make bannock, that's wonderful. But my question is because when I hear things like that, I think about the whole double-edged sword of, you know, not only am I white and I think about that background, I also think about what my fundamental faith did as well. But in action of trying to heal that, what are some of the things that, I mean, even outside of faith communities, what can we do to help make that feel less triggering and help you to feel kind of at home, I guess?
Thank you. First of all, I guess those are my crosses to bear. My triggers, you know, and that's part of my journey in life, and I need to overcome those, which I have for the most part. You know, I've overcome some of those things I talked about. Don't bother me anymore because I've done some work around it, and it is an individual journey, but people like you having an understanding. Many of us turned away completely from Christianity. I will have nothing to do with it, and I don't hate it. I don't hate anybody. You know, it's just not for me. I have my own way, my own spirituality that I do on a daily basis. I smudged this morning before I came and pray. You know, I give thanks along the way for the many things that Mother Earth gives us. So I have my own spiritual beliefs that I fall back on. But as far as to go to a church, the whole world is my church. You know, Mother Earth, it's there. Wherever you go, it's church. Here is church if you want to make it that, you know. But there are, though, many of our people who still follow Christian ways. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, if that's where their comfort level is, if that's what gives them the strength and the, you know, the want to live a good life, that's a good thing. You know, my mother was a staunch Catholic. She went to Rome to visit the Pope and stuff like that, you know. And I would take her to church. I'd drop her off at church, you know. She'd invite the priest home to come and have supper. And the priest would try and get me to go with my mom to church. And I said, no, that's Mom's thing. That's not my thing, you know. So don't try and convert me, you know. So that is my, I guess one of my triggers again is when people come to my door and try and sell you their religion. You know, that's what destroyed our indigenous nations. Christianity really took over and destroyed us, you know. So I'm really not for that. But as far as the church, you know, I think Some of the things that the churches have done is the socials, the food, that will always come if there's food. You know? Yeah. Just being a part of the social events and things like that. And if they decide to go to a service, so be it, you know. But just making sure that people feel welcome. Yeah. So that's all I can say.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to move along in our program now. We have spent a long time in our conversation, and we would like to thank you all for all of your questions and for your patience and time in listening to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for your thoughts. It was, I think, a very open, honest, and just a huge teaching experience or learning experience for everyone, so thank you so much. We would also like to thank everyone who made the program today possible, IT, the administration, students, thank you so much for volunteering. Thank you to Krista Holden and to Callista, wherever you are. I don't know. Thank you so much for all of your hard work. In closing, we would like to call on Vera and Ruben, her partner, and their daughter Amelia to sing for us. We would like to acknowledge with this song the residential school survivors, to the children who did not come home, and most recently the James Smith Cree Nation. May this song provide comfort for everyone.
And then the next one she'll sing.
We could not have had a better ending to this program. Thank you so much, Vera, Ruben, and Amelia. Thank you so much. I would like to, yes. I would like to invite everyone now back to the Indigenous Student Lounge for some refreshments and bring those commitments to Truth and Reconciliation with you. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and tomorrow we'll be thinking at around 2:15 a.m. or p.m., not a.m., 2:15 p.m. If you could take a small moment just to acknowledge Truth and Reconciliation in the residential schools. Thank you so much.